perfect. All right, so well, welcome to the last session for the Stanford Webcamp. I'm going to be talking about rich data management and publishing the data on websites. And you see this weird name called SeedMe. That's kind of the name of the project which this talk is built up upon. And so my name is Amit Chaurasia. I lead the visualization group at the Supercomputer Center at UCSD. And we deal with a lot of data, and that's how I kind of got interested in this sort of thing. So what we are trying to envision and imagine is that the capability to kind of deal with data has been getting better and better. However, there are a lot of roadblocks still to make the data easily shareable, or to manage it, or search and visualize it. And so that's kind of the driver for this work which I'm presenting here. So we all know that data is increasing. You know, we are consuming more data, we are generating more data, our team sizes are increasing. The kinds of data which we work with is increasing. People are working, you know, in different time zones and different places. Of course, I'm giving a talk from San Diego, and some of you are probably in the Bay Area. And so there is diversification of the data type, the way the data is used, consumed, produced, and that is causing, you know, all kinds of issues on data governance and the way we use data, we share data, we publish data. There is also a push by the government and sponsors to make the data open. And there is this very nice principles that got published a few years back, I believe in Nature or Science. And those are called FAIR data principles. So FAIR is an acronym of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And so a lot of research community is kind of gathering behind this FAIR principles and trying to see that what can we do to make a lot of data that is coming out from research to make it open and available to people in general. However, with the growing data, we don't really have very powerful and rich data management solutions. We kind of still are beholden to the way we kind of put the data on our file systems, right? And that's pretty much what we expose over the web also. And so this is kind of the motivation for this work. And once we kind of start talking about putting the data on the web, we need to think about how do we provide the access control to that data? How do we make the collaboration work with it? Of course, where the data is going to be stored, how it's going to be moved. And if a lot of data needs to be moved, then we need to figure out a way to automate that, because moving that data manually is not tenable. In addition to that, so the stumbling blocks in some ways can be considered to a large extent as you know, mostly a solved problem. However, you know, the data always has some context, right? And that kind of lives either in README files, or it lives in emails, or it lives in notes, or it lives in people's head. And it's really hard to kind of maintain and control some quality regarding the data that may be kind of coming in. Also, presenting the data is done in mostly kind of mimicking the file system. So the presentation is generally pretty weak and poor. Most people are not able to find their own data very easily. And so a lot of data goes dark. And the tools for kind of, you know, enabling us to find that data basically get limited to the knowledge of knowing the file names or something like that, which is pretty hard thing to do after a while. People can remember some context about the data, but it's pretty hard to remember the file names, which is what you have to kind of search and find something. So I think that there was something on the chat, but I couldn't really see that. So, oh yeah, sure. So I think it's a small crowd, so feel free to jump in and use your microphone and just ask questions. We don't really have to use chat. Okay, so moving along. And so the idea for this work is to unify, the context, which I call description, provide an ability for discussion on any data item, present the data in a customizable or flexible form, and then make the discovery a bit easier. And so that's kind of the driving goal for this work, which I'm talking about. And so the project is called SeedMe, which is an acronym for Stream, Encode, Explore, and Disseminate My Experiments. And then the principal work in this project is to kind of create a virtual file system that allows us to, manage and organize the data in a familiar way, but provide more expressive and effective way to kind of, display and present that data. So I'm not going to read all the bullets here. Perhaps you can just skim through some of those. But the idea is to allow the data to be presented in a rich manner, right? So can we present the data with better layouts? Can we add more context to it? Can we annotate the data better? Can we make visualizations on top of it? Can we share it? Can we comment on it, right? And more importantly, we want this data to be accessible from mobile phones to desktops and even through supercomputers. So the modality of accessibility is also important, right? So we want to obviously use the data or view the data through our web browsers. But we also want to have kind of programmatic way to kind of interact with data through API. And then also we want to be able to script this thing fairly easily, so we need command line access. So it's kind of a holy trinity, which I like to say, through the user interface, through the API, and through command line. So all kind of modalities need to be supported. And then provide an ability to extend this file system where that needs be. And then, of course, this whole thing is built on Drupal, so this platform can easily be used as a full website in any form or fashion. Again, so this is kind of mentioning the same thing in a very different language. Not going to dwell further on this. So let's take a quick look at it, that what we are trying to accomplish. So if on the right side we take a look at the Google Drive, where we have put up a folder with a bunch of subfolders and files. That's kind of the view we got on the right side. This is pretty much what we get with any cloud drive provider, Dropbox, OneDrive, or anybody we use. This is what more or less everyone kind of does. So there is utility to this, and it's a great organization scheme and listing scheme. It has served us well. We want to preserve that. On the left side is, our view of, or our interpretation, or our way to represent this, right? So we have a way to kind of, it's obviously running on Drupal, so you can customize it, you can brand it. And if you look at the file listing now, you see that the file names and folder names are there, but now we can actually see snippets of description about what that is, right? So we can see a very small snippet of any description associated with this folder and also with the files. If we come down here, we can see this description actually in detail, what this folder is about, right? So in this case, this is a research group which runs, laser plasma simulations, and they are describing their parameters here. Normally, these parameters would be spread around in like 5 or 6 files. And so you'll have to kind of look them up or download those files and look them up. And the idea here is if all that is available at a quick glance, where as soon as you get to the folder, it makes the way to assess and use this data more meaningful and more the interaction with kind of providing feedback or understanding what it is much faster, right? Then, of course, we can comment on any of the files and folders. and that kind of brings in the discussion back to where the data lives rather than through emails and other things. So you have a trace of what people are talking about, what is being said about the data. And then again, this is kind of on the collaboration lines. And again, this commenting is available on any file, right? This is not just commenting, which many of the cloud providers are adding to the Word documents only, right? This is commenting available on any file, or it could be an image, it could be a binary file, it could be anything. Then we are also thinking about supporting simple visualization. For example, if you have a structured data in a CSV or a JSON format, we can parse that data and create automatic visualizations. The visualizations are not necessarily being created for presentation or going to be very fancy, but the idea is to give people a quick preview of what that data looks like without the need to kind of download and plot these things. So we have a few people who are already using this system, and here are some testimonials. And our primary audience at the moment is research groups, and we are setting these things up for research groups. They share the data on this system, and the professors reviews the work from the students and postdocs, and it has significantly increased the pace of work with which a research group kind of functions, that has a lot of data to kind of move around and share. And so we are hearing good things about the system from them. So our target users, at least initially, is the researchers. People can obviously use it as a collaboration hub or for project repositories. We are targeting some scientific applications that can use it as a data hub, where data can move in and out from the application through programmatic means, and then make it available for the community. And then we are also talking to some people who may have interest in kind of rolling this out to their, set of faculty or researchers, and make use of the software which we have developed here. So this is very familiar to most of the people who know Drupal. What we have done is built a set of modules that are independent of each other, but they can work together as well. So today I'm going to be talking about the 4 modules, and we'll go into detail in a moment. We also have a standalone PHP library called Structured Data API that is actually being used in the chart suite module. Essentially, it's a library which parses CSV and JSON files and translates the data back and forth. Turns out we looked at the PHP CSV parser, and it's not very strong. It's a fairly limited parser. So we basically wrote our own, and it provides much more capability than the one which is natively available. And we hope to contribute this back to the PHP project. It's already open source and available under a BSD license, but we'll push it to PHP project sometime soon. I was talking about user interaction. Obviously, any website should be usable through a web browser, but then we want to be able to extend this interaction through command line and through REST clients. And we just don't want to only expose the REST API. We actually want to provide the clients so people don't have to write these clients again and again. So we provide the client, people just use it. So the principal work, which basically organizes the data, is a module called FolderShare. It implements a virtual file system for Drupal. It provides access control. It provides, how things can be shared. It does searching and indexing. And then it has these web services from which there is an API and the clients and the command line utility which works through that. Then we have the chart suite module, which does the visualization, and it uses the structured data API, which I was talking about earlier. And then we have another module called Formatter Suite. And so we'll talk about this in a moment. And then we have a couple other modules. And so let's take a look at these modules in a little bit more detail. So the FolderShare module implements a virtual file system. It basically has its own data model with access controls. It basically does all the file management and corresponding security of allowing an ability to upload arbitrary files to a website, right? And this is a big deal, right? I mean, normally you cannot upload any type of files on a website due to security issues, but we handle this into the virtual file system. And of course, any data management utility cannot restrict what kinds of files can be uploaded to a service. You can, but generally you can't really come up with a list. And you need to provide a flexible approach for whatever comes in and manage the security on the system side. Then we have a way of kind of displaying this data, using canonical, folders and files, but then also in a richer way. And then we have corresponding UI to kind of manage the files and folders through a familiar user interface. And this is all actually implemented as command plugins, so it's extensible. So if people want to kind of add their own features to the file system, they can, use the API to write their own plugins and, add more functionality. Searching is also a part of this. We largely make use of Drupal's underlying API, but we do a little bit more. We look at the files and basically create those keywords and then pass it to the Drupal search service, and that stores the keywords and so forth. And then, of course, the web services are exposing all this this virtual file system through which we build the clients and things like that. The file system itself has capability to be extended. The stock file system comes with a notion of files and folders, and also ability to provide description for those. So once we look at the demo, you'll get a better sense of this. But it's not limited to that. Sites can add other fields to the file system, like keywords, or enable comments, or add other fields as they see fit. And then once you have all this other information in there, you obviously want to customize how the look for all this content looks like. And this is a pretty standard way. Drupal allows you to kind of manage the data through manage forms and manage display. And the FolderShare exposes all that data model through the familiar interface to kind of move these things around and show them in a very flexible form and fashion. And as I was mentioning, that the command plugins are extensible through custom APIs or can be developed further. There is a very well documented API for FolderShare. We have actually set up a documentation site also, if somebody wants to kind of explore that. With the data organization, we also want an ability to share this data, right? So the file system allows data sharing capability. By default, everything is private. And then, of course, any data can be made, read only, or read or write and delete permissions, which we call author. And then, of course, everything can be made public. The data sharing model which FolderShare uses is a little different than the Unix or POSIX file system. We only allow sharing from the topmost files or folders. And the reason for that is that it becomes very hard to discover things if they are kind of have different permission models, inside it. So we have simplified the sharing process, which actually works a little better from a performance point of view also, that we don't have to compute the permissions recursively, because that's a very expensive thing to do on a database, right? So the site performance actually goes down rapidly if you enable a recursive permission model. So we don't use that. We just use a top level permission model. And then every child basically has a pointer to the top root folder or file where you can see what the permissions are, and then you give access to the people who are supposed to have access or not. So a little bit of trivia there. So right now, the FolderShare module is looking like it's like the 4th largest module if when compared to the Drupal core. So we have taken a lot of time to kind of develop this, and it's a fairly big and complex module internally. And it has gone through lots of updates before we actually even released it on Drupal. So the Drupal release, which we just did, was the last one which you see here. So all the other releases have been internal, and they have gone through a significant amount of testing and before we actually released it on Drupal. So here is another module called Chart Suite, which actually generates visualization of text files in CSV and JSON format. And again, it's a standalone module for Drupal. It can be used without FolderShare or with FolderShare. And internally, it uses the structured data API to parse the CSV and JSON files and creates internal data structures, which are then passed onto the Google Charts API or library, which actually does the plotting. Then we have the Formatter Suite module, which actually provides formatting of different field types. Drupal already ships with a lot of formatters, but the formatting capability for the formatters that ship with Drupal core are somewhat limited to basic types. And so when we started looking at, presenting this data in a rich way, we felt the need to kind of, add more capability to the way the formatters are available. So we actually ended up writing quite a bit of formatters for displaying different kinds of data. And I'll give you an example of one or two. But there are all these formatters that are available that can be used. Then we also have another module which is basically about single sign-on for higher education institutions. And I'm not sure if you guys have been had a opportunity to deal with the single sign-on setup process with Shibboleth and SAML and all that, and that's fairly complex. And there's a fairly stable service which has been run from UIUC for past 6 or 7 years, and it's rock solid at this point. And they actually expose in-commons authentication services available through their API, and it makes single sign-on for a lot of application very, very simple. All you have to do is register with them and install a Drupal module and set up those keys, and then basically you have single sign-on working on any site. And it uses the OAuth 2 protocol for authentication. When we looked at some of the modules which are available, they actually do the work just fine. However, when you are looking at a website, you don't want the entire university to have access to that website, right? So you want an ability to kind of, only give access to the designated set of people. And so we actually ended up integrating with user restrictions module, which is another module available, instead of writing our own, because it largely did what we wanted. And then it does many other things which are necessary for a website. Like you want to, once you have SSO enabled on a website, you don't want to open registration for anyone. But once you close the registration, actually the SSO stops working. So you need an ability to override the site-wide settings, but still enable them for the SSO. Also, the SSO modules actually generate machine-oriented usernames, which are, whatever, 32 characters long. And they are sort of obnoxious if they ever get exposed to the users. So we actually plug in a better way to kind of generate usernames. And then we also store organization information in case your SSO will enable registration from multiple organizations. So it's useful to know where the users are coming from. And if you don't know which organization they are coming from, you basically have no very limited way to kind of track that out. So we actually have a way to kind of store all that information. So let's take a quick look at demonstration for this thing. Okay, so let's see. I have something going on here. Yeah, I don't know how you guys, can you guys see the font okay, or it's too small?
That's perfect, yeah.
Looks okay? Okay. Okay, so let's see if I can do this over. So when the FolderShare module is installed on a site, you come and see a view called something called personal files. Here you can actually create, you know, a new folder. You can obviously change the name of it. And this is something which we have built into the file system. And the ability to add description, right? And if you guys are familiar with, you know, the different way to kind of make rich text enabled on Drupal, and you can actually enable these toolbars or the CK editor to display this in a rich form. So now we are looking at a folder which has a description, right? We can then go ahead and say, hey, I want to upload a bunch of data here. So I can say, hey, let me upload a bunch of data here. And there we go. So we got some data going on there. Each of these files, actually, we can add description, right? So the description is available for any file or folder. We can, of course, go ahead and create child folders there. And then we can obviously move things around. If you select something and do a right click, you get a familiar menu like you get on your operating system. And if you look at this menu, this is context sensitive. So if I select multiple things, the menu basically adapts to whether the operations allow, you know, on singular entities or multiple entities. Since I'm an administrator, I can do change ownership. Normally, this will not be available to a regular user. And of course, all the basic operations which you expect are available on this module. So we go back here. If I go here, like I was mentioning, the sharing ability is only available at the root item. So if you go here and click, the share menu item is available. If you click on share, you can basically grant view or you know, write privileges to anybody on the site. And then all those users will have access to this folder, and they can, you know, modify this or just view it. I was talking about an ability for, so here is a sample CSV file. Normally, if you click on it, nothing will happen, right? But this is what the chart suite module does essentially, right? It allows us to create these visualizations on the fly and see that the content of the file in a visual form. And of course, we can display it in the data form as well, right? And you can obviously download that file, or, you know, if the browser permits you to view it, you can view it like that, right? And so there are a few more tricks going on there. Here's another file in a JSON format. And if you notice, this one has a different kind of plotting available. So the structured data API actually does a little bit more than parsing. It tries to figure out the structure and the semantics about the data. And based on what it finds, it basically makes those plots available for that data, right? So let's go back here. And I'm going to go back one more time here. And actually, we'll get back to that in a moment. So that's basically what that looks like. So let's go back and look at whom did we share this with. So we gave this lorem ipsum user an author privilege on this one. So I'm going to go to people, go to lorem ipsum and masquerade as lorem ipsum. So I'm now logged in as lorem ipsum. and I go to data, and here is the folder which I just shared with Lorem Ipsum. It says that, hey, site administrator actually shared this folder. I can open this folder, and since Lorem Ipsum has write access to this, they can add more folders to it. They can upload more data types. So let's upload some more data types, or some more data here. And then let's take a look at this one. So notice this is a JSON file again, but it's in a tree format. And then it plots it like a tree instead of plotting it as a bar chart or a pie chart. It understands what the underlying data type is and then basically makes that visualization available. Let's see if there is something else here. Actually, the parser can also parse HTML files. In case a HTML file has a table inside it, it can parse that table out and then again present that in a visualization form. So that was something which we thought was interesting to kind of support. So that's kind of the sharing capability. I haven't turned on the comments here, but you can turn on the comments too. So let's go back and unmasquerade, and let's start to look at some more things in detail here. So if I go to the administrator mode and then look at the settings for this module, you can see that the manage fields, manage form, and manage display fields are available, which is kind of the standard thing in Drupal. If we look at the files, we can actually set up where the files are going to be stored. It's recommended that you store the files on the private file system, but if you can't, you can store it on public. But private file system offers you better control and security. You can, by default, FolderShare doesn't restrict what types of files can be uploaded, but if you think you want to restrict it to particular file types, you can. We provide a fairly big list of files here, but you can obviously change that. If you look at the interface, this is the menu which we see on right click. And this is what I was mentioning, that all of these are implemented as plugin. So for example, if you said that, hey, I want to be able to perform certain operations on these files, that plugin can kind of come in here and can be enabled. And any of these operations which we are seeing here can be enabled or disabled. Whatever you do here is site-wide, essentially. So for example, one idea maybe is AI seems to be pretty popular in Bay Area these days. So for example, someone wants to do, a classification of an image, or, facial recognition of an image. A pipeline can be added here that, hey, that say, hey, perform face recognition on an image. And that operation is only available when you right-click an image or something like that. So the idea is that you can expose these new operations other than just the regular file system kind of operations through the API and add your own customizations and make a much more richer web-based system for your data. Like I was mentioning, we make use of Drupal's built-in search, which is not very powerful. However, we wanted to kind of keep FolderShare not independent of any other dependencies. So there are no dependencies for FolderShare besides the ones that are available in Drupal core. And it uses the native search module. And anytime you upload a file, it will get indexed on cron runtime. So there is a little bit of delay in which the indexing happens, but that's something you can increase the frequency of cron if you want things to be indexed sooner. Then we have some support for enabling logging for any operation which happens, but that's mostly used for debugging purpose. But if there is a reason to log what site users are doing, that's available. Then we have ability to display a usage report for who is using how much, and then how often should that be rebuilt. And so by default, it's actually manual, but then you can set a periodic a way to kind of see the usage. So let's go quickly and see what usage looks like. So if we go here, basically this is what the usage looks like. It basically is a simple table which lists all the users, how many folders they have, how much storage they are using, and the total storage. And you can rebuild this on demand. Depending on how much you have, this can take some time or it could be pretty swift. Let's go back to the settings again. And then lastly, there is the web services. Interestingly, the Drupal core does not have a module to actually show the REST configuration. It will enable or disable the REST modules programmatically, but there is no way to see it. So there is a contributed module called REST UI, and that allows you to see what methods are available. By default, FolderShare will enable all of these things, but if there is a reason to change any of these, you can change that. And right now, FolderShare only supports cookie authentication. The basic authentication turns out it's sort of broken in some respects. And we have looked at it in detail, but at this time, it looks like it's not going to be the right thing to support. So the cookie auth is there. We have also internally have a working API key authentication. So that works, but there are some problems with the basic auth, and that has to do with Drupal core. Okay, so that's kind of on the configuration side. Let me just quickly show you here also a little bit of the layout, what's happening, and how that works. If you look at the file display, if you don't install anything, it will just use generic files. And then you see that chart suite is adding this formatter for interactive charts. So if you set this up as the interactive charts, it will say, oh, this is the extension type I support. Can I use this? If I can, I'm going to use it. If I can't, I'm going to fall back to something else. That's what the chart suite does. But in this case, we have used something else here. We have some other formatter called PDB formatter. And we can compose it with another contributed module called fallback. Basically, all it does is it says, hey, use this formatter for some types of files. If this doesn't work, fall back to something else. Use this one for some sort of files. And if this doesn't work, fall back to something else. So you can kind of create a list of formatter which kind of just falls. So it's basically creating a switch statement, which will basically render your files if the modules support it. And then we have this image formatter, which comes from the formatter suite. And normally, Drupal will allow you to do the styling through the image styles, which is available. But let's say if you want this image to be open in a new window, those things are not natively available in Drupal core. So with this module, we can make some of those things available. You can also display the caption, display the size, display the MIME type, display the image size, and so forth. So there are lots of things that are there which are normally not available with the core formatters, and this thing makes those available. So that's kind of the thing which we use the formatter suite for. Formatter suite also provides an interesting formatter. Let me see if I can show this here. It's not useful here, but in some cases it can come in very handy. This thing called image with embedded data URL. So let's say if you have to show a listing of images which has 100 images on one page, if you use Drupal course formatter, you can display them as thumbnails, but each of those images are being created on the server. And when that page is rendered, your web server or your browser has to make a trip to the web server to get all those images, right? And so if you have 100 images, you have 100 trips happening to your web server to get each of those images. And this can actually slow down the web page significantly. And so what we did was we actually, instead of serving the images, we read the images from the web server, but then base64 encode them and then push them as the HTML. And so that's what this image with embedded data URL does. And so if you do that, it will allow you to kind of, again, choose which image style you're using, and it will basically create those styles if they are not available, and it will generate the base64 encoded data. But now that data is actually the form of the body of the page, instead of them being served through the second trip, or every image doesn't require a trip. Basically, it's the main page which contains everything. And so there is a little bit of delay in generating that page, but it's way faster than going in and getting 100 files, right? And this is what a lot of themes do, right? They embed all those things in as base64, encoded images, so that the web browser doesn't have to make trips to get each and every small fragment of image. They just get embedded into, the body or the response of your web page. So that one is an interesting one there. Okay, so let's go back. I wanted to show you one more quick thing, and then we can have a open for questions. I think I'm running out of the time. So I wouldn't have the time to display, the programmatic capability. So here is another file. This is a file which is a structure of a protein. Basically, we uploaded this, but then we wrote a module formatter, which basically uses a JavaScript library developed by somebody else, which can display the protein in 3 dimensions. And we simply use that JavaScript library to show the protein, using the JavaScript library which is available. And so there is a little bit of work which needs to be done. I think this is mostly like 10 or 20 lines of code, which basically can bundle the JavaScript library and create these visualizations or renderings of other types. Okay, so let me stop here and see if there are any questions. And I'm sure if people are still hanging out here. I think there are a few people online. I don't know if there is anybody in the room.
There's no question in the room.
Okay.
Well, just make sure this is not preview.
Is there a question? I can't hear you.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes.
It's just
Jean, was there a comment?
Yes, there is a question, but I'm not sure I understood it. Could you come forward, please? Now, stop.
So is it part of the future like a module, or it will be just available as paid, like a paid subscription service, something like how someone can make use of?
Oh, you were talking about whether this is available as a subscription or something like that?
Are you talking about how this module would be available in Drupal?
Yeah, Drupal is through or contributed module, or like a paid subscription, or purchase whatever.
So the modules are already available on Drupal. So if you're interested, you can download them and plug them in your website and use them. There is no charge for that. However, we are envisioning to kind of bundle up this whole thing and make it available for anyone to use as a service. But the source code for all this work is already open source.
So
does that answer the question?
Did that answer your question?
So it's a paid suite product. So it's a product.
Perhaps you can move up a little bit closer to the microphone so I can hear you well.
It's not clear to me, if I want to use it, I have to purchase like one-time license or like subscription. How do I make use of this?
So Jean, I don't know, perhaps you can rephrase the question if you heard it well.
Okay, I can repeat. The question was the business model for this module. Is it free to download? Is it open source? Do you charge for support?
So the module is already available on Drupal. It is open source. It is available under the GPL2 license, which is the license used by Drupal. And so there is no charge for using the module or downloading the module. Obviously, if you want support then we can talk about that kind of thing privately.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. That answers the questions.
All right, perfect. Anything else? I mean, it's only, I think the online people left, so it's just you and us. If there are any other questions, we can chat.
Another question. There are a couple of people in the room.
Okay.
Good question. Have you done accessibility testing on the format?
So we haven't done anything like that at the moment. I think let me see if I can answer this question in a reasonable way. We are following Drupal conventions as to the greatest length possible. So whatever we are doing should be accessibility friendly out of the box. And if and everything is themable by the site, so it largely depends on what theme the site may be using. We don't control the layout and theme, the site does. So it's up to the site to kind of, make sure that they are not breaking the accessibility rules. I think there may be one issue with the menuing system, and I'm not sure where that is. For a very long time, we kept developing 3 versions of the user interface. One was using without any JavaScript, then was using one with JavaScript, and then there was the third UI that was doing JavaScript with Ajax. It became very, very tough to do certain kind of interactions without JavaScript. So before releasing the module, we had to drop that support. Now, I'm not sure whether the JavaScript imposes the accessibility restriction. If it does, then there may be some issue, and obviously it can be addressed. But if it doesn't, I think it should work fine. So if there is a volunteer who wants to kind of take this for a spin, we would love to hear that, how it fares.
Okay. Any other question? Nope. That's it from here.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure to talk about this work. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I do want to mention that the work which we have done here and presented has been supported by the National Science Foundation, and it's been a long road for us to get here. And so feel free to take these modules for a spin. If you don't have the time to install them, you can go to our website and click on the trial, and it bundles everything together. So the demo which I was showing is already available. You can easily create those instances and try it yourself. And if you like to get administrative access to those sites, send us a note, and we are happy to give you administrative access on request.
Amit, could you put your slide full screen? It's hard for us to take pictures of the.
Yeah, here we go.
And this is recorded, so it will be available probably in a couple of days on the site, on the Drupal campsite.
All right. Perfect. Well, have a great weekend, guys. And thanks for allowing me to present remotely.
Thank you.
All right. All right. I hear a couple of claps there. Thank you very much. So it was worth sticking around, I guess, right? All right. All right. Bye, guys.